It was supposed to be her promotion meeting. She'd straightened her blazer twice, checked her reflection in the elevator mirror, and even rehearsed her "I'm honored" speech. Just enough humility to stroke egos, just enough confidence to remind them she'd earned it. Her fingers had trembled slightly as she carried her leather-bound portfolio into conference room B, the one with the fake orchids and the thermostat that never worked. But the room was cold that morning in more ways than one. Across the table, her boss, a man who used buzzwords like synergy, and who had once complimented her on how pleasantly forgettable her voice was, offered her a practiced smile. The kind politicians give before cutting ribbons or throats. HR sat to his left. That was her first warning. The second came with the envelope slid across the polished mahogany, like a poisoned appetizer. "We've decided to go in a different direction," he said, voice syrupy. She blinked. That was it. No warning, no build-up. Just a clean cut. She didn't move to take the envelope. Her hands stayed on the leather portfolio, still sealed shut. Her brain caught up 10 seconds late, but her body moved on its own. Polite smile, nod, exhale through the nose. Corporate choreography. Inside, her stomach nodded. Dismissed. Not restructured. Not transitioned. Dismissed. HR began to speak, soft and patronizing, but she didn't hear it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man who, just last week, had called her his rock during a Zoom call. Her eyes stung, but not from sadness. It was humiliation. Cold, sharp, blood-draining humiliation. She laughed softly, just once. They mistook it for acceptance. "Well," she said, standing voice level, heart screaming, "hope the investor demo goes well tomorrow." The words hung like fog, and she let them stew. Only she knew the full architecture of that demo. The layers, the backups, the contingencies. Only she had written the keyline code, and only she had access to the last backup after the migration. But she said none of this aloud. Polite smile. Numb calm. She adjusted her sleeve. "Thanks for the opportunity," she added, and walked out. Down the hall, her heels echoed like gunshots. Behind her, the storm had already begun to gather. Only they didn't know it yet. But she did. And she wasn't done. Not even close. The security guard couldn't have been more than 23. Wide shoulders, puffy vest, and that overly careful tone people use when dealing with cornered animals or pregnant women. His badge read E. Daryl. She memorized it out of spite. "Ma'am, I'll need to take the laptop," he said, palm open, awkward and rehearsed. She held it a moment longer than she needed to, her fingertips lingering on the scratched surface, still warm from her last login. Projects lived inside it. Scripts. Code she'd written half delirious at 3:12 a.m., lit only by the blue light of loyalty and a bottle of Pinot. She handed it over without a word, and it felt like an organ being removed. "I'll escort you to the lobby," he added. "Oh, how generous," she replied, the smile slicing across her face like a paper cut. He didn't get the sarcasm. Few ever did. The walk felt longer than it should have. Past the glass-walled bullpen where interns pretended not to look. Past the marketing manager who once gave her a Christmas mug instead of a bonus. Past the plaque near reception that still listed her name, Senior Implementation Strategist, in cheap gold lettering. They handed her a cardboard box on the way down. Inside, a half-dead succulent, a branded mug she never used, 3 tangled chargers, and the stress ball she'd squeezed bloody during last year's crunch. Not included. The respect, the equity, the promises made in warm tones and walked back in icy memos. Her internal voice kicked in like an old friend with a knife. "Guess 10 years buys you a cardboard box and a security guard." The receptionist tried to meet her eyes. Failed. Outside, the sun mocked her with its brightness. She stood at the curb with her whole career flattened into a recycled box, heart jackhammering behind her ribs. Not from grief, but from restraint. They thought it was over. They thought the system she'd built was just plug and play, ready for the next compliant body. They didn't realize she'd left something behind. Not a file, not even code. Something subtle, quiet, buried so deep it wouldn't surface until someone somewhere, triggered it without realizing. She didn't look back as she crossed the street. But if she had, she might have seen the faint flicker of fluorescent lights inside conference room B. Like a fuse quietly waiting to reach its end.it had started with a shrug. A late Friday meeting where someone, probably Bryce from DevOps, laughed and said, "No one reads documentation anyway." She had smiled back, lips tight, eyes cold. That night, she stayed at the office until 2:47 a.m., not out of anger, out of clarity. They had built their kingdom on her back, brick by brick, update by update, trusting that she would always be there. They praised her for being thorough, even as they dismissed her retention policies as paranoid and her security layers as over-engineered. She let them. What they didn't know was that deep beneath the user interface, behind the layered access portals and dummy dashboards, lived something she never documented, something she never named, just a whisper of a function, triggered not by malice, but by arrogance. Not destructive. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Her failsafe was disruptive, surgically so. It wouldn't crash the system or delete files. That would have made her a villain. No, it would simply alter presentation data during demos, just enough to seem like human error. A misplaced decimal here, a missing graph label there, projected profits showing up as losses, real-time syncing delays that appeared like incompetence, not sabotage. She wove it into the most mundane scripts. Version control notes labeled QL fix and temp hot patch. Obfuscated functions buried under 8 layers of abstraction. All marked with timestamps from weekends, because no one ever checked the commits logged at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. She even left clues for herself. Easter eggs in the code. A string called echo_ghost, and a note that read, "You only notice the firewall when it's gone." And now, standing on the curb outside the building, cardboard box at her feet, she let herself feel it. Grim satisfaction. Her ghost was still in the machine. Not screaming, not raging, just waiting. The investors would walk in tomorrow. The CEO would click Launch Demo. The screen would populate, slowly, awkwardly, with charts that didn't match last week's printouts. Someone would panic. Someone else would reboot. Fingers would point. And somewhere in the chaos, her absence would crystallize. Not in silence, but in glitch. She had become their phantom limb. Amputated but aching. No need for fire or fury. Just a whisper in the wires. And no one, not even Bryce, would think to blame the woman who always documented everything. 10 minutes. That's how long it took. She was barely halfway through her cappuccino, the foam still intact, when the tremors started. Not literal ones, those came later, but digital, systemic. The kind of quiet malfunctions that don't scream fire, but hum something's wrong beneath every keystroke. Across the street, through the cafe's smudged glass, she could see the top floor lights flicker with movement. People pacing, hands waving. Someone holding a phone like it was a live grenade. Even from here, she recognized the CTO's silhouette. Tall, bald, shoulders tight like coiled wire. Inside that room, panic bloomed. The demo slides refused to load past the first frame. Graphs inverted, revenue plunging into the red, market share sloping into zero. One chart simply blinked out altogether, replaced by a cheerful loading spinner that spun in mockery. Financial projections were gone. Not corrupted, not deleted, just missing, like a magician's sleight of hand. Only the magician was sipping an almond croissant latte across the street in yesterday's blazer. She watched it all unfold through 2 layers of glass and one of indifference. Phones buzzed. Investors frowned in polite disbelief, the kind that teetered dangerously close to insult. Someone, likely the intern, ran in with a backup drive that wouldn't mount. Another pulled out hard copies only to realize the numbers no longer aligned. Her former boss, the same man who'd handed her a dismissal envelope instead of a promotion, began stammering through a PowerPoint that wouldn't advance, trying to ad-lib growth strategies while sweat formed moons on his designer shirt. She could practically hear him say, "It was working just yesterday." Of course it had, because she'd let it. The systems were intact technically. There was no virus, No breach, just minor, strategic corrosion, like termites inside load-bearing walls. Everything looked fine until someone leaned too hard. And none of them knew the system like she did. She took a slow sip, the warmth of the coffee meeting the colder satisfaction blooming in her chest. It wasn't joy. It was something purer. Ironic delight. The kind of poetic justice you don't plan for, but build line by line over years of being underestimated. Someone on the executive team pointed toward the window, perhaps wondering if she had left quietly, or if they were being watched. She didn't hide. She simply raised her cup in a mock toast and smiled. Across the street, the panic deepened. Inside her, the silence settled, calm, complete. The ghost had arrived right on schedule. The phone began its meltdown at 11:06 a.m. First came a missed call from unknown, a number she recognized as the CEO's assistant, the one who always offered fake smiles and filtered coffee preferences into a CRM, then HR, then the CTO, then her former boss, 3 times in a row, no voicemail, just panic stitched into call history. By 11:14, her notifications blurred into a buzzing symphony of desperation. Emails with subject lines like, urgent, need your input, let's discuss options, and one particularly bold, we'll triple it. She let the phone vibrate against the wood table like a wounded animal. Across the street, the windows of the boardroom had gone opaque with panic. People paced. A whiteboard had been rolled in. Bad sign. Whiteboards meant chaos control when the software failed and the humans had to improvise. Poorly. She answered the 4th call just to hear him sweat. Listen, I know this is awkward. Her former boss began, voice brittle, like he was trying to smile through a fire. But we'd really appreciate a quick consult. Just a look at what's going on. Oh, she said, slowly stirring her coffee. You mean the thing I built that no one cared to understand? Silence. We're prepared to offer full reinstatement, he said, scrambling, with retroactive promotion. And a bonus. Significant. I'll make it happen personally. She let the silence stretch until it frayed. Tempting, she said flatly. But I'd hate to be fattened up before the next slaughter. Click. The next call was from HR. The one after that, the CEO himself. She answered none of them. Instead, she scrolled through the flood of messages. Long-winded pleas, suddenly respectful subject lines, one even invoking the company's future. She could have laughed, could have screamed. Instead, she just watched her phone light up like a firework factory on fire. All the people who had once told her, "You're not a culture fit," or "You're too rigid," now treating her like a lifeline. Bittersweet empowerment coursed through her. Because now they saw her worth, but only through the lens of crisis. Only when the system bent without her hands. Only when the ghost they discarded began to haunt their forecasts, their presentations, their reputations. It was never about the money. It wasn't even about the title. It was about being invisible until the moment everything broke without her. She muted the phone, finished her croissant, and opened her calendar. She had all day. The cafe's background hum blurred. Espresso machines hissing, indie music pulsing soft. But inside her head, the silence gave way to something louder. Memories. Not nostalgic, not kind. No slow violins, no sepia tones. Just sharp, sudden flashes that hit like glass shards under the skin. There she was 3 years ago, standing in a conference room, explaining a new integration protocol she'd designed. Watching as the director nodded slowly, then later presented it to the board with his name on the slide deck and hers left off entirely. Cut to a Friday stand-up, where she'd raised a concern about security redundancies. Bryce from DevOps rolled his eyes and muttered paranoid, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The room laughed. She smiled too. Survival instinct. And again, the Slack message from a coworker, supposed to be private, accidentally sent to her. She's smart but exhausting. Doesn't know when to chill. One after another, they flooded in. The late nights on version rollbacks that saved millions but earned no thanks. The holidays skipped. The birthday dinners canceled for, Just one more deployment. The bruising silence every time her contributions were acknowledged as team efforts, while the loudest voices in the room took credit. She blinked, the image of the present snapping back into focus. The phone, still vibrating on the table. The building across the street, now a hive of frenzied movement and flickering screens. They needed her. But where were they when she needed even a sliver of acknowledgement? Where was this respect when she was warning them the system lacked redundancy? Where was the triple salary when she was running diagnostics from a hospital bed after collapsing from exhaustion? Nowhere. That was the truth of it. They never respected her. Not really. They tolerated her brilliance the way people tolerate warning lights. Irritants until ignored long enough to cause catastrophe. And now, catastrophe had come wearing her fingerprints. She felt powerful. Of course she did. But underneath it, hollow. Not regret. She didn't want her job back, or their fake apologies. But 10 years. 10 years of bending over backwards, of pretending she didn't notice the theft, the erasure, the subtle sexist jokes masked as culture. She had won. She knew it. And they knew it. But what she held now wasn't joy. It was justice dipped in ash. A decade of her life, distilled into a perfect, silent revenge. And still it hurt. She pushed the box of croissant crumbs away and stared out the window again. Inside that building, the empire she'd built on loyalty and silence was cracking. And all she had left was time. The first alert hit Twitter at 12:09 p.m. A blurry image of a frozen slide, captioned, "This is the tech they bragged about?" The poster tagged 3 industry blogs and 2 major VCs. Retweets came fast, snark layered with disbelief, like vultures circling a fresh kill. By 12:16, TechTruth had picked it up. Glitch at flagship demo sends investors running. Is the tech a sham? The article was brutal. Phrases like catastrophic failure, shaky infrastructure, and internal incompetence bloomed like weeds. No mention of her, of course. That was the whole point. She'd made herself invisible until now. From her cafe table, she watched the empire she built collapse in real time. Across the street, the investor exodus began. Crisp suits, sharp heels, eyes narrowed in practiced corporate disgust. No shouting, just quiet, calculated retreat, the kind that hurts more than rage. One man even tossed his visitor badge on the floor as he walked out. Inside, the CEO looked like a man being chewed in slow motion. The CTO gestured frantically at the frozen screen, sweat glistening even from this distance. And her boss, former boss, stood motionless, jaw slack, watching everything he once controlled disintegrate pixel by pixel. Notifications poured in. LinkedIn whispers. Slack screenshots forwarded by a former intern. Even the company subreddit had caught wind. Someone posted, "Did the demo just die?" In front of everyone. She felt it rise in her. Satisfaction, thick and undeniable. And yet, it didn't flood her like she'd imagined. It didn't crash into her chest with trumpets and fire. It just settled, like the quiet click of a puzzle piece slipping into place. Her phone buzzed again. A headline this time. When overconfidence meets underprepared. The demo that derailed a company. She let out a quiet breath through her nose. A smile tugged the corner of her mouth. Guess my work finally made headlines. Her inner voice whispered, drenched in sarcasm. She didn't laugh, didn't gloat, just watched. Let the silence grow thick around her like armor. The company had thought the worst thing she could do was leave. They never imagined what would happen when she stopped protecting them. It came through Signal. Not email, not LinkedIn. Signal. Encrypted. Private. Personal. The sender was Lane, a former teammate, one of the rare few who actually saw her during those brutal grindstone years. Lane, who used to leave post-it notes with dumb memes on her monitor after all-nighters. Who once told a VP to shut up mid-meeting when they tried to take credit for her patch fix. The message was short. A single line. I don't know if you did it, but if you did, holy hell. And also, we need to talk. She hesitated before replying. Not because of fear. Not even because of guilt. Because Lane was the only person whose opinion still meant anything. They met 2 hours later, 3 blocks away, at a cafe even smaller than the one she just left. Lane looked older, more lines around the eyes, same caffeine tremor in her hands. "You look free," Lane said, sliding her a coffee. She didn't answer, just sipped. "You know what people are saying?" Lane continued. "They're calling it the most elegant act of corporate sabotage in a decade. They think it was an AI glitch, a firmware fault, someone hacked the demo server. No one suspects you." She didn't blink. She wouldn't give Lane the satisfaction. Lane leaned forward. "You've got options now. Not just revenge. Rebirth. My team needs someone like you. Someone who sees the whole system. We're building something clean. Ground up. No politics. Real autonomy." A pause. Then quieter. "But this thing you did, if it was you, it could haunt you. Maybe not legally, but mentally. You know that, right?" The words landed somewhere in her spine. Not quite pain. Not quite comfort. She thought of the faces across the street. Red, desperate, scrambling. She thought of her name erased from decks, her designs pawned off as collaborative strategy. She thought of 10 years of silence. And then she thought of that glorious flicker of power, of watching them burn themselves on the system she once protected like a firewall in human form. "I'm not looking to be innocent," she said at last. "Just not invisible." Lane nodded slowly. No judgment, just understanding. "Then let's build something where you never have to shrink to fit again." She didn't answer right away, because this was the real choice, not just between past and future, but between fury and purpose. She felt calm, but not numb. For the first time in years, she could breathe. Conflicted peace. That's what it was. She wasn't a villain. Not entirely. But she wasn't a martyr either. She was what they made her. And now, she'd decide what came next. The final call came just after sunset. Her phone screen lit up with his name. First name only now, no title, no authority. Just a man gasping for air in the ruins of the empire he once ruled with quarterly quotas and empty praise. She didn't answer. She let it ring, then ring again. And finally, she silenced it. No voicemail this time. He'd run out of scripts. She stood at the edge of the parking structure rooftop, city humming below. Cars like arteries pulsing in a grid she no longer belonged to. Behind her, the office building glowed dim and lifeless. Like a stage after the actors had fled, the set pieces still smoldering. They'd rebuild, maybe, but not the same. The ghost she'd left behind had done its work. Trust fractured, reputations mangled, the illusion of control shattered like cheap glass. Even if they patched the system, even if they spun the story to the press, they would always remember that day. The investors walking out, the charts lying, the humiliating silence after the crash, and her absence. She thought about answering the call just to deliver one final line. Something cold, something perfect. But no, that would give him too much. Her silence was the message. She pulled her coat tighter as wind curled around her. She had no job, no office, no neat title to anchor herself to anymore. But she had no chains either. And her dignity? It was intact. Rebuilt from every quiet moment she swallowed her brilliance just to survive one more meeting. She walked away from the edge, heels clicking against concrete. With every step, she shed a piece of who they'd tried to make her. The overachiever, the ghostwriter of success stories signed by other men, the watchdog mistaken for a doormat. No more. Her closing thought surfaced like a line of code returning true. They thought cutting me loose would erase me. Turns out I was the code. And when you cut the code, everything breaks. Behind her, only salted earth remained, where loyalty once lived and burned.